saying that it's also an opportunity to congratulate the Instituto de Estudos Políticos and Professor João Carlos Espada, that is there, for the well-succeed organization of this kind of forum that has a quality and a consistency that is happening all years, and that join all of you and all of us with pleasure. We are here in a special session, in a special panel. We have the opportunity here to join fellows, specialists that are from two universities, Catholic University, of course, and Georgetown University. And this is a real opportunity to make collaboration and to thinking in a global world about the problems. And here the point is very clear. It's a conversation on democracy and governance in a context of global recession of democracy, a point with great accuracy. And especially because this starts with Professor Livia Franco, that is here with us in a fellowship in Georgetown, 2021, wasn't it? Fall 2021. Was there, and then started with the arising network, and it's good that after 1 year passed, we are here, the two universities with these good fellows going down. So my task is very easy. It's just to give you the welcome. Also, I realize that is here the president of FLAD, Rita Faden, and we appreciate very much being here with us. And all the students and all the academics. And my point is just to say welcome for all of you, and to pass the word to the chair of this panel. This is a chair that I will be someone who, needless to say, I'm proud to have met in my life in some happy occasions. The first one was when you put a medal in my son. Oh, yeah. Yes, he was a student, a school student, and Nuno was minister, and it was very touching. But and of course, Nuno, it's someone that is. I'm very proud to can pass him as a chair, because he's a mathematician. It was minister, and it's a professor, an academic, and also a man with a very human attitude that is very important in these discussions of the global world and democracy. So Nuno is president of Initiative Education, professor at ISEG, from an institute from University of Lisbon. His academic research focuses on stochastic models, time series applications on financial and social problems, and statistical database evaluation of policy measures. He has published extensively in econometrics and statistical journal. He was Education and Science Minister of Portugal from 2011 to 2014. During this tenure, the dropout rate has reduced from, and it was amazing, from 25% to 13.7%. Retention rates improved. And also amazing was that Portuguese students achieved the best results ever in international surveys such as PISA or TIMS. Is a prolific science writer and educational essayist. Some of his books we have here, you have two examples. The one translated in various languages and published international was in 2010, Figuring It Out. And his most recent books include the recently edited Improving a Country's Education, PISA 2018, Results in 10 Countries, and his co-organized data-driven policy impact evaluation. So this is just a few points of Nuno experience and expertise. And so, Nuno, you have the stage.
Thank you very much, Margarita. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be so kindly introduced by you. And my job here, as you guess, since I'm a professor of mathematics, is to keep time, right? So I'm failing miserably already because we are 25 seconds ahead of the schedule, but that's okay. We will recover. We'll recover because I'm going to be really brief. So now we have a panel about two programs, the program in Institute of IEP at this institute and in Georgetown University. And so I guess that main goal of this is to discuss how these programs are being conducted, what the students think about it, what students learn with it, how students discuss things. And since we are talking about politics and about contemporaneous movements, students should be interested in knowing how you deal with current problems in the world. So I'm not saying about today's problem, but contemporaneous problems. So I guess that we should give the floor to many students, so that as many as you can, to ask as many questions as you can. So because I guess you are interested in this program. So let me introduce briefly the panel. So we have Daniel Brumberg, who is a PhD from Chicago, a very recent PhD from Chicago.
No, a very old PhD.
Oh, very old. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Up as we speak.
Sorry about that. And it's from last century, right?
Yes.
Oh, unbelievable.
Barely invented the car.
He is a professor in the Department of Government and director of Democracy and Government's MA program at Georgetown. So if you haven't ever visited Georgetown, it's a beautiful place. I'm talking about university in Washington. It's a beautiful place. It's the best location, right? It's right across. It's right across to that place where there was a scandal some time ago, a hotel, Watergate, I think. Oh, okay, okay. But it's not. But it's separated by the river, I think. Okay, okay. So then he has been the senior advisor of the United States Institute of Peace and is a senior non-residence fellow at the Arab Center, and is author of numerous articles and books on political and social change in the Middle East. So he was a consultant at the U.S. Department of State, and he is on the editorial board of Journal of Democracy, and he is regularly contributed to other journals in the area. Now, Dr. Elton Skandai is Associate Director of Democracy and Government's program. So you are here both discussing the same program, but from different perspectives. His research focuses on strengthening democracy and governance in various contexts. So he has researched on democratization, civil society mobilization, legal transfers, anti-corruption policies in the Balkans, the Western Balkans, and he has published in many peer-reviewed journals. He is analyst for the Freedom House and president of the Society of Albanian Studies. He has a PhD, more recent one, I think, yes, in Cornell University. So we have here two distinct academics. And we now go to the distinct academics that we have here from the Institute of the IEP. Well, we can't mix both languages. José Tomás Castelo Branco is a guest professor at the Institute. He teaches here since 2000. I thought you weren't born in 2000, but it's okay. But okay. Something that's confusing me. Okay, so he worked at University of Beira Interior first, and he's the head of the Masters in Arts in Governance, Leadership, and Democracy Studies at this Institute of Political Studies. So his current interests are in eco-conservatism and the idea of liberty before liberalism, which I would love to know what are your thoughts on that. Then William Hasselberger is associate professor at this same institute and is director of Digital Ethics Laboratory. And he has done research in many areas, including moral philosophy, artificial intelligence, and human intelligence. If you could explain that a little bit, it would be nice. How this translates into political studies. And he has published in many journals, such as Social Research, Philosophy, Pacific Philosophical Quarterly, and so on. So we have here 4 distinct scholars, and the floor is yours. So please, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? That's very good. Well, thanks very much. How much time do I have?
10 minutes.
Because you said you're a mathematician. I'm a qualitative political scientist as opposed to a quantitative one, so it may be somewhat of a challenge for me to stick to the 10 minutes. But, you know, before I say anything, and I'm going to put them on the spot, we have 2 of our students here, and I'm going to ask, starting with Molly, to get up and introduce herself, and then Michael, if you would. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I really wanted to make sure that you see that we actually came with 2 of our students that are here. Introduce yourself. A quick, just, you know, your name, rank, and serial number.
I'm Michael Angeloni. Just finished my first year in the program, so really excited to be here today.
I'm Molly, and I also just finished my first year and very happy to be here.
Great, thank you so much. And I encourage you that, you know, when you want to get the skinny on a program, you don't ask the director. You ask the students, so I encourage all of you. And let me just say how delighted I am to be here. You know, Livia, had we not sat down to have that coffee and started talking, I'm not sure, you know, how fortuitous some things are, but, you know, on one level they're fortuitous. On the other hand, Sam Khalion was very involved in sort of facilitating these relationships with the Catholic University of Portugal, with FLAD, but, you know, Sam was not always the most organized person, nor did we have much of a paper trail. And poor Sam, when he had this stroke, you know, I sort of want to dedicate this session to him. He was a good friend, and he helped me run the program. We were co-directors for many years. So I just want to mention that and thank FLAD and Catholic University of Portugal and say that I hope this is an opportunity to sort of renew, again, that relationship and expand it. And I'm also delighted to be here with Elton, who will be taking over as director of the program. I created this program with my colleague Stephen Heidemann back in 2006. I couldn't even remember, as I put this thing together, exactly when it began, and I had to sort of reach out to different colleagues to get the date. But we began in 2006, and I'm going to talk very quickly about some of these sort of intellectual roots of this MA program and practical roots, and say something about the evolution of it. And I really want to leave enough time to have a discussion with you, and particularly faculty and students, about sort of the possibilities for cooperation, because that's really what we want to look forward to. And a couple of, and I've also prepared a statement. You have a copy of it. I realized I didn't bring an online copy of it, but if you get it online, there are lots of links. So if you want to sort of press those links and get the kind of the propaganda that I didn't bring with me, it's right there by link, so you can help yourself and get a better understanding of sort of aspects of the program by just going online as well. But the point I made in this brief sort of reflections on all these years of having created this program and having sort of led it for many years is that the program has evolved over time and in response to sort of the different moments of history and the place of the United States in the whole sort of framework of global politics and democracy. And the program was started by myself and Steve Heidemann. Now, this is a kind of strange thing. Steve and I are scholars of the Middle East, and people say, where's the democracy? The advantage of sort of working a democracy program, being a scholar of the Middle East, is I've spent my life working on the mechanics of autocracy. And you cannot really address the possibilities for democracy without first understanding how authoritarian regimes work, what sustains them, and what undermines them. So I've spent my career doing that. I did increasingly work on Tunisia in the last few years. I lived in Egypt over time and speak Arabic and French, so I'm sort of familiar with the region. And then I worked on Tunisia. Now Tunisia is under the leadership of an autocrat, and maybe that's that's the last hope there for a while. It doesn't look very good, but having an understanding of sort of how authoritarianism works is, I think, one of the first critical elements in a good democracy and governance program. What are the vulnerabilities? What are the openings? What sustains them? How adaptable are they? Wonderful to have my colleague Mark Plattner here, who was talking about sort of the issue of authoritarianism, totalitarianism, sort of things we wrestle with, but and they're beyond definitional. They're really about sort of understanding how these systems work, right? And so we spend a lot of time with our students talking about those mechanics. But in terms of the context of the program, it started at a moment where America was the preeminent power, where there was a lot of optimism about the future of democracy and liberal democracy in particular. And that was reflected in a program that really was about sort of training the generation and the next generation of young people, both from the United States and abroad, who would go into the broad field of democracy assistance. And it was at a time where the field was not really a field. It wasn't professionalized. Now, you can kill a field by professionalizing it. I'm well aware of that. But there was a great need to sort of have a core set of ideas and concepts and curricula. And I sat down with my colleague Steve Heidemann. We brought out, in those days, we had yellow pads and pens. We actually used them. And we sat down and said, how are we going to do this? And we created this program. And it was built around this sort of expectation that the United States would be expanding its support for democracy, and that we at Georgetown, because it's a good place and because it's based in Washington, we're well placed to do that. And that's what we did for many years. A small class, we would take on 10 to 15 students a year for a 2-year program. A core set of requirements. I won't bore you by going over the core, but it really reflected this notion that somehow we were sort of contributing to this cadre of activists and thinkers. And we really made our bumper sticker the sort of linking theory and practice, because before the program existed as an MA, it was actually a PhD program in democracy studies, and that didn't succeed for various reasons. But we took from the PhD program an expectation that we would train our students to be serious theorists and analysts and practitioners at the same time, and build this sort of relationship. And that's what we've tried to do. So that was that's point A in terms of sort of where the origins of this. And as I said in my statement, it really is the only dedicated MA program of its kind in the country. Stanford has excellent related programs, Johns Hopkins, but this is unusual, strangely enough, in that regard. And we built that program around those optimistic assumptions, expectations during a period of optimism. It was first called the Democracy MA program, not the governance program. We added governance to the program. I think that many of our courses increasingly are about governance, but we continue to sort of wrestle with this broad concept of governance and sort of how to include it, because initially our courses were really focused on democratic transitions, social movements, leadership, how to push these processes forward, as opposed to the problems of governance in established or emerging democracies. So we've tried to enhance that. That's point B. And I think we've done a pretty good job of it. It's not easy. We're a small program. We don't have a big staff. We have big ideas and big ambitions, but we're a small program. But we added the governance aspect to it, and that was when Sam Michal and I started working the program together. We always had students, as I said before, from the United States and from many countries overseas. 2 minutes. Well, you see, that's what happens when you're a qualitative social science. And then we shifted really to, in the final analysis, what has happened to the program. I mean, as the United States has faced the challenge of global authoritarianism, as we have faced the challenge of the rise of populist authoritarianism in the United States, and we now know how close we came to what looked like a kind of constitutional putsch on January 6th, we've really sort of shifted our focus more and more to sort of global problems of authoritarianism, of populism, of the internationalization of populist movements, of the problem of polarization. Elton and I teach a course on polarization at Georgetown. 2 years ago, I started working with the theater director at Georgetown to create a program using theater and performance to work with young people from both Georgetown and an evangelical Protestant Christian school to get them to talk to one another. So we've really tried to sort of infuse our program not only with this working, focused, practice-oriented program on issues of communication, empathy, and so on, but also other sort of practical-related programs. And increasingly, the practice aspect of it is something that we've really emphasized. I cannot even begin to sort of encompass all these ideas in a few minutes, but I'd be happy to sort of elaborate on these or answer any questions you may have. So once again, I'm just delighted to be here. It's a thrill not only to be here at this conference, but actually to sort of get out of Washington and breathe the air here, because there's in many ways it's become a little stifling. So thanks for having me here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So yes, thank you as well to Livia for introducing us, and to the organizers for throwing this really interesting forum that Dan and myself are excited to join. Today, my presentation will build on Professor Bromberg's, and it's really about how do we go around in building a program that educates thought leaders in democracy studies in the context of democratic erosion. At Georgetown, we try to conduct productive research as well as teach and train future thought leaders and practitioners in democracy and governance. Now, this seems like a mouthful, but so I will just spend a little bit of time unpacking a little bit of what we're trying to do. We are responsive to the era in which we are teaching and researching. As you know, most research indicates that since 2005, we've seen democratic erosion and backsliding around the world. And we see it not simply in authoritarian and hybrid regimes, but we increasingly see it in consolidated regimes in the US and European Union. As such, we actually do need, as in our field, we need new thinking and tools that allows us to address these multiple challenges. Here we also respond to what our students are bringing to us. In the past, our program has focused to international democracy promotion. Increasingly, about 1/3 of our students who come from the US, are now interested in applying global tools about how to build and sustain democracy within the US context. So we need to respond to that, and I think that is a change that we are embracing. Some of the tools that we use, and Dan was mentioning about countering polarization. So we co-teach a polarization class in which we look at global polarization and global populisms, and about half the readings are about the US context as well. Instead of asking the students to just write a normal final paper, research paper, we actually ask them to design an intervention, to write a paper that uses current theories and models drawn not just from political science, but from psychology, economics, sociology, etc., to design an intervention on campus, in our community, that they think might be able to address such polarization. Part of the reason why we have such pedagogical tools is because when we talk to organizations in the field, there is a lot of frustration that our current models are not as good anymore. So we rely a lot on this interaction between students and faculty to try to generate ideas. So I'm going to tell you about some of the ideas that our students have been generating just in the past, during the past semester, when they wrote 10 to 20 papers on this. So they come up with creative interventions to address toxic polarization, both ideological and effective, such as parent-child mindfulness practice training, improv comedy for Congress stuff, using moral reframing to address the values of each community, actually kind of, liberals and conservatives speak different moral languages. So trying to reach out and understand and speak to each other is really important. Using dialogue and bridge building circles, investment in local media, civic curricular education. Because of where we are in DC and Georgetown, we attract students that bring insights then from neuroscience, psychology, etc., to address such challenges. And we have an approach that actually says, let's try to generate some of these ideas and test them and see what works. And if something works, then we can scale it up. Similarly, in another class, using, again, design principle, we'll look at the potential and limit of institutional design. In a lot of post-war context, there is constitutional, a lot of democracy builders write constitutions, design electoral rules, etc. So the students actually have to think about both the theory and the practice and the political limitations of designing such processes, some institutional reform. And as such, again, this is a future-oriented paper. The first paper that I have to do is looking in the past, looking at an institution that was designed and whether it had the intended effect. The last paper is actually looking forward. And it's important here to look in terms of both analysis, practice, but also the political viability of these solutions that the students are proposing. And the students have proposed institutional reforms to address various issues. So Michael, who's here, proposed institutional reform to address the Catalan crisis in nearby Spain, shifting to more proportional representation voting systems in the US and Iraq, judicial sector reform to address transnational crime in Brazil. Now, some of the solutions are not going to be as politically viable now as one of the students proposed a very thoughtful analysis that says we need to end sectarian institutional system in Lebanon, which is really great, very hard to do. It's like, right, it's, it's embedded. So the students have to write about this. And so the students have to think then not just in terms of the tools, but also the coalitions of actors that would support and obstruct such institutional change. In the end, then you have to think about the politics of it. So we're not simply talking about ideas, but we're unpacking them, we're looking at analysis, and then we're looking at the political viability of it. So just to end, we really think it's important to synthesize a lot of these new ideas and tools to address what we see in terms of global retreat of democracies. And our students are interested in applying both international and domestic tools like this. Using design principles, we can look forward and backward to think in terms of what we can achieve. And we're very pleased. We've had conversations with both Nuno and Jose about trying to build some connections between our master programs to facilitate this fruitful exchange, both with students coming to either campuses, faculty we already have, Portuguese faculty who come to Georgetown, but there is ways for us to create further contacts. And since I have 2 minutes, I'm just going to do, I know, I'm a son of a mathematician too, so yeah, no, we complement each other. So no, I want to recognize actually the students. So if you are an undergraduate student who's interested in issues of democracy, can you please stand up? Undergraduate. Okay. All right. So look around. Visual mapping. You're about 1/3 here. Okay. Thank you. Sit down. If you're a master's student who is interested in issues of democracy and governance, can you please stand up? Okay. Great. Thank you.
Like to take long walks by the beach. Please stand up.
And if you are a PhD student who's interested in such topics, if you can stand up. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. So I think it's important. I mean, we truly value this interaction. We hope you can engage and talk to each other and talk to us about it as well. Okay, thank you.
There you go, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? I hope. Thank you very much. It is a great honor to be here for the 30th time. Yes, and I wasn't born 30 years ago. But yes, it is a great honor to be here, especially in this table with two former ministers of education, whom I admire very much, and three colleagues who two of you already know. The other one, Bill, has preceded me in coordinating this MA, and I am extremely grateful for his work. Much of what we achieved is due to his efforts, not mine. I'm just continuing his work and trying not to disturb what he achieved so far. So far, I'm not doing terribly wrong. I would like to give you some introduction to our MA program, but before that, I would also like to acknowledge our dear colleague, Professor Livia Franco, who has been recently in a visiting professorship in Georgetown, and actually, she was the one who managed to get us together.
Indeed.
And yes, and I would...
Very important.
Yes, and I was going to add that precisely. It was with the support of Flood, to the institution to whom we owe so much, and who has been so terribly important in the construction of the institute that we have today. And so it is due to the generosity also of these institutions that we can do what we love to do. And what we love to do is to study politics, and as Professor Elton just referred, cherish and know more about democracies. And in our MA program devoted to governance, leadership, and democracy studies, that's precisely what we try to do. This program is devoted not only to Portuguese students, but also to international students. And I'm glad to say that we have a number of them. We have, at the moment, some 26 students. Half of these are Portuguese, the other half are foreign students, actually coming from different countries like Afghanistan, Germany, Brazil, Cameroon, Canada, Mexico, Nigeria, Russia, and Senegal. So we have a very broad, diverse group with whom we love to work. Also, I would like to add that we have a very high success rate, of which we are very proud. And we are proud of the work of our students, not really our own. They have a very high success rate. For the past 3 years, we've had 24 dissertations with an average mark of over 18 in 20, which is very, very good. So again, we are very, very proud of this. Apart from the countries that I mentioned, we have also received students from Austria, Bulgaria, Canada, Slovakia, Spain, the US, the Netherlands, Hungary, Moldova, Poland, Syria, and Sweden. So again, this adds to the picture. As I told you, this is devoted to, of course, international students who would like to come to Portugal and study politics in Portugal, but also to Portuguese students who, for some reason, cannot go abroad and study abroad. So what we offer them is a glimpse of what would be an international experience, starting with the English as the official language of the program. So every course is taught in English, every paper is written in English, and the final dissertation is written in English. And apart from these academic work, we are also very proud to try and give them an international experience in the programs, the academic exchange programs that we have had in the past. For the recent years, due to COVID and other reasons, we could not keep up with them, but we hope to continue them. And in this regard, I would like to acknowledge the programs we have with the University of Jagiellonian in Poland and the University of Pázmány Péter in Hungary, with whom we have joint degrees. We also have had exchange programs with the University of Oxford, where our students went for a brief exchange of 3 months, which is enough to get a glimpse of the atmosphere. We also had exchange programs with other 2 American universities, the State University of Massachusetts and the University of Colorado, Boulder. They were very, very good and exciting programs. So this is in the past. For the present and the future, I would very much like to keep working with, and at least talking with our colleagues, with our dear colleagues, Daniel and Elton, and trying to establish some kind of future together. I don't know in the way we can manage to do it, but I'm sure that we will find some way to do it. Not only to exchange students, but also to exchange faculty. And I would like to add this information to our Portuguese students. Some of the most interesting experience you may find in your program, should you wish to get on board with this MA program, are the intensive seminars we have with professors coming from abroad. Again, it is not an experience of internationalization, but it is an experience of getting international perspectives, contacts, etc. And I won't bother you much more, but I would like to end with saying that this is, after all, what university is all about, to help us rising above our parochial experience, our common day-to-day experience, and get a glimpse of the immense universe that is outside. And after all, that is where the word university comes from, the universe. So this is what we aim at, and we would very much like to welcome you. I will be here for today and tomorrow, and hopefully I will be here for the for the next weeks and month, etc. We cannot predict the future, but should you have any further query, please feel free to email, WhatsApp me, whatever channel you may find useful, and I'm more than happy to try and answer all your questions. Thank you very, very much.
Sorry. Hello, that was just wake up call. Well, so I'm actually, my PhD is in philosophy, so I'm even further from the mathematician here, so please, you can, well, actually not in the classical sense. Yes. So if I do go on too long, definitely, let me know. So, yes, thank you very much to all the previous speakers and the very kind words from José Tomás Castelo Branco. I beg to differ, to disagree. I think he's taking the program in really exciting directions of his own, and I'm very happy that he is in charge of the MA program and excited to see how it develops. So I guess, the previous talks were a little bit more focused on the nature of these programs, and I guess I will focus on a substantive issue and try and show why it's important that a program like these kind of interdisciplinary, out-of-the-box MAs are important, okay? So the title of this conference is Confronting the Authoritarian Challenge. Now, how do you study a complex, high-level, geopolitical challenge like the rise of new forms of authoritarianism? I submit that complex problems of this form don't have kind of a clean definition or a clean boundary that corresponds to traditional disciplinary categories of the university. How do you understand the rise of authoritarianism? In other words, you can't just look at it from the perspective of classical economics, or just at the perspective of political science in the classical sense, or just political philosophy, normative political philosophy, or just, international relations. There are problems that are so complex that they sort of transcend a variety of different disciplines and require the conceptual tools of different disciplines in order to really see them clearly and understand how they work. So the challenge posed by contemporary authoritarianism, I think, is clearly this kind of complex, multifaceted problem. I think it cuts across political science and philosophy, international relations, global political economy, development studies, including in the Global South, strategy, and what's close to my heart, technology studies, the study of artificial intelligence and systems of digital surveillance and predictive analytics. So when I went to graduate school, there was a kind of taken for granted view that there was a natural and necessary connection between economic growth, material prosperity, the development of advanced technologies and the education of a population, and political rights and liberal democracy and the spread of political freedom. That these, economic growth and the technological advances would lead to the open sharing of news and information, promotion of individual rights. People would rationally select more free forms of government. And also, it was thought that highly centralized systems were inefficient and lacking in kind of effective uses of knowledge and would eventually crumble, right? I think times have changed substantially since then, and what we see now is the rise of a kind of a new kind of authoritarianism that is both economically prosperous and dynamic, and that is very advanced in certain areas of artificial intelligence, for instance, machine learning, and yet remains a highly centralized and in some ways increasingly authoritarian and controlling political system. So the previous orthodoxy, I think, has shown to be false. Now, what challenge does this pose? I mean, it poses a challenge to the citizens of authoritarian states, but I think it also poses a challenge to the citizens of liberal democracies as well, because the appeal of more centralized technocratic forms of decision-making, of digital surveillance of our daily lives, the monitoring of our own activities for our own good is, I mean, the appeal of that is increasing, right? And as the New York Times has reported, there's been a kind of export of models of, for instance, the censored internet to other countries in the global south. An export of facial recognition and social scoring systems to countries outside of, say, China and Russia. And we in the West confront I think a kind of paradox, or a challenge anyway, which is how do we continue to develop advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and big data, surveillance technologies and so forth, without sliding into more centralized, more authoritarian, more technocratic forms of governance? In total contrast to the traditional orthodoxy that I talked about before, could it be that a centralized dictatorship has some advantages in the way of technological development, insofar as the central state has direct access to massive amounts of citizens' data and can use and track citizens in ways to develop advanced algorithms and advanced technology, whereas we in the West have privacy rights, or at least up until now, we have, to some extent, privacy protections and political rights. Does that actually constitute in some ways a challenge for us to, maintain our technological edge, our technological advantage, without ceding too much power to say, big technological corporations or to the state? So let me just close by saying, I think these are unanswered questions, but we do see a world in which there is for the first time in my lifetime since the Cold War, there is a genuine competition between two visions of how society should be ordered, between a kind of liberal, open, democratic system and a system that promises, anyway, to provide economic growth to its citizens, but without the kinds of political rights and liberties that we hold dear, and without popular representation and democratic elections and so forth. And the world, and the global south in particular, I think, is trying to figure out where it stands on these things. And that's where the ideological contest will unfold over the coming decades. So just to close, I'll say in the MA, one thing that we did in the last few years is we did a large research project. It wasn't only with the MA program, but it involved 3 MA students and 3 PhD students to study the changing nature of authoritarian power in global politics. And we took a really interdisciplinary angle. So this was everything from economic statecraft, right, or the use of economic instruments for political purposes in Africa, authoritarian economic statecraft in Africa, to cyber warfare, to questions of how, what I was saying before, how to develop advanced AI without becoming a system of mass, a regime of mass surveillance here in the West. Space technology as well, the cooperation between China and Russia in developing new forms of space technologies, and the shape that this would take in the future. And my humble opinion is, on the basis of that 2-year research program, that it showed that the kind of approach that you learn in the MA program, which is interdisciplinary, where you take traditional classes and you read some of the great books, but you also take, for instance, you could take artificial intelligence, ethics and politics with me, and other programs, global political economy, development studies, studies of Mozambique and insurgency, and just very different kinds of programs. That interdisciplinary approach, it enables people to see something like the challenge of authoritarianism in its full complexity. Without that, you get a kind of abstraction. doesn't give the full scope of the challenge. So, here's to these kinds of interdisciplinary, out-of-the-box degrees. Thank you very much.
Very much. We have time now for some questions and comments. The only thing I ask people is to be brief, direct to the point, okay? So it doesn't matter, you can have comments as well as questions. Please, so this lady over there first. Yes, you.
So hi, I will apologize for the audacity, first of all. I would like to thank all of you for being here, first of all, but I'm an undergraduate student, and for me and for all of us, it's very hard to find a job without any experience. And the courses that are offered by IEP and also Georgetown are very theoretical. They're not very practical. And so in the sense of asking what Georgetown would bring to us with an MA, as well as also asking another question, to what extent are democracies, for example, the Portuguese democracy as well as the United States democracy, are they able to compare each other? Can we compare the Portuguese and the United States democracy? Are we allowed to do that? Are we?
No one forbids you from doing that.
Yes, but are we
That's very good.
developed? Are we developed enough to do that?
That's very good.
I think to a certain extent, I think they're not comparable to a certain extent,
Okay.
and I think the programs are very different to an extent that maybe in Portugal we'll learn about more about like the European kind of knowledge, but I think an European student, in a sense that in Georgetown maybe there will be more focus in the United States, but if I want to work in European kind of sense, so if I want to work in Spain, maybe in Portugal, or in the European Union, I won't have much of a focus.
Okay,
So,
okay, thank you. I
thank
think
you
we
very
got,
much.
you got your point.
Yeah.
Or your 2 points. They are
Yes.
2 great points.
Thank you very much.
If I remember well your name. Yes.
Thank you so much, Professor Kato. I have a question. I want to thank the panel for their interesting contribution. Recently, we see the rise of so-called hybrid regimes or illiberal democracies, and I just want to know if the panel has something interesting to say about that.
Of course it does, but later. So please, it's yes, that's what I'm collecting three people. Okay, yes, please.
Hello, I have a question for Professor Bloomberg, because you touched on the January 6th events, and I was going to ask if you think that the events surrounding the 2020 US election, did they highlight weaknesses and fragilities within the American system, or rather did they show how actually resilient the institutions are, and would in the future some more, more rational and more competent actors succeed in, especially if the election would be maybe tighter, with a smaller margin? Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. So, do you want to go ahead, please?
Those are great questions,
Yeah.
and we should have a
So
whole
you
day.
have 4 questions, don't forget.
Yes, no, I'm going to try to encapsulate an answer that
Please,
addresses all of them in different ways. First of all, we always tell our students at Georgetown that other than education, the second most important job we do with them is helping them find work. And if we're not successful at that, we're not successful, right? So I understand exactly what you're saying. Now, we have our focus on the United States. We don't really have a focus on the United States. We have a kind of effort to integrate issues that are important in American politics that have global implications, okay? But most of our work is about giving people the analytical and practical training to work in the field. That's what's really important. So we don't, as I said in my statement, we don't spend much time preaching about democracy. We're about sort of, this is the Anglo-American how to do it sort of tradition, and that's what we focus on. So we're very much focused on wrestling with what it means to support democracies, and that means our students go back to all over the world and they're working on the ground, and that's really, and sometimes in very dangerous places like Iraq or Afghanistan. So that's a critical point. I do think that in terms of these issues of global authoritarianism and the rise of populism, that we have to recognize that a lot of those factors are driven by dynamics within Western democracies. And the increasing globalization of those movements through the internet poses a distinct challenge that's quite different, related to, but quite different from the challenges of Russia and China. And I think we really have to accept that and deal with that. But I think there are ways of studying that are systematic, and ways of focusing on the NED. Has a lot of the work that NED does now is sort of how do we make democracies more resilient to resist these sorts of processes. But I do think that, yes, I mean, the nature of the global and domestic challenges that we face now are converging. And that's sort of the opening to sort of do this sort of work. As far as hybrid regimes, of course, hybrid regimes have been sort of the kind of authoritarian regime now for 15 or 20 years. The illiberal variety of it is just one example of hybridism. And one of the things we do struggle with, I think, is sort of how to think about the vulnerabilities of hybrid regimes, because why they are so interesting is that the hybridism gives them the capacity to resist democratic pressures. And really gives them the flexibility and the capacity sort of to survive. So the question is, how can we poke holes into that?
Very good. I don't know if you, Jose, if you want to add something, or no? What about you?
Just a brief thing on the practical, just to add on the practical aspect. We do include, again, in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, there's a lot of emphasis on tools, sometimes too much, but kind of we do actually include skill-based courses where we have professionals working in the DC area who are senior people in various organizations who teach on monitoring and evaluation, on kind of how to write policy memos, do briefings, how to fundraise and design a program, etc. But these actually go beyond, I mean, they apply some of the tools and theoretical tools that we learn to apply them directly toward our next job. And most of our students are also doing internships while they are doing the master program as well. So they're getting practical experience. They could get credits if they reflect on the internship. So we try to integrate it. Yeah, and you don't have to apply Portugal and the United States, but you can think about applying institutions, or you can look at how societies face similar or different challenges in terms of media systems or the judiciary, etc. So I think right now a lot of the cutting edge research, I mean, just to kind of build, is happening at the intersection of, say, media and democracy, cyber and this, and that's where it's actually very useful to see how different societies react to the same kind of stimulus. So, but you have to, I mean, again, it's great that you're already asking such questions. It just requires training to kind of actually go from the questions to designing a method to actually answering those questions.
Can I just piggyback very quickly on that and just say that, you know, your question about Portugal and the United States, comparative politics is as much about contrast as comparisons. And we learn a terrific amount from doing systematic contrasting of systems. And it teaches us a lot of things. So the word comparative politics is a bit of a misnomer methodologically, and it has real implications. Why do we have polarization in the United States and not the same level of toxic polarization or polarization in all in Portugal? Why are some countries susceptible and not others? So this is a big picture question that we can answer by contrasting systems that look very different and are very different, and coming up with important kinds of answers. So I think that's important.
If I could just say
Yes, please. Yeah.
one quick.
Because you should also, I think that it would be interesting to answer this question from the Portuguese point of view, from this program at the Institute here.
Yes.
Because let's say we have here 2 students from the US. Mm-hmm. Would they profit for being here for a month or not, or 6 months or whatever?
I think so. I mean, look, so I think I'm going to sell the program, sell my fish, as we say.
Please do.
Please.
Yeah, so.
It's not a zero-sum game.
Look, I think that there's, I mean, we mentioned both authoritarianism and populism, and that there are differences in those challenges, right? But there's also certain connections there that take different forms in different countries. So somebody already brought up January 20th, or excuse me, January 6th, 2020.
Which is meant to prevent January 20th.
Right, exactly, that's right. The inoculation of the... So why I mean, there's an interesting kind of psychological question there. Why did that come about from a kind of, you know, where did those views come from, and how did that polarization arise? I mean, partly that's related to the way that technology can be used to spread misinformation and to sort of trap people into kind of echo chambers or filter bubbles and this sort of thing. And there was contributions from external political actors, authoritarian states, in fomenting some of this disinformation around, you know, basically undermining people's faith in the institutions of their own state, right? So there has to be the citizens of the liberal democracies have a certain, what some people call disinformation profile. They have a certain, they will respond to certain messages as, you know, your government is so corrupt because of X, Y, and Z. And then they'll click on that and start reading, and then click on something even more extreme, and then click on something even more extreme, and next they're sort of really polarized and perhaps, you know, even in a kind of more dangerous situation. The disinformation profile of someone in America will have a particular character, right? The disinformation profile of someone in Brazil or Portugal or Eastern Europe or Germany or the UK will be different, right? Because of cultural differences. And so if studying authoritarianism or hybrid regimes from different kind of national perspectives, I think brings to light how this stuff really works. I mean, the questions about immigration play really well in certain parts of America, and oh, the immigrants are taking all these jobs. You know, that is a great hook for a certain kind of a disinformation. But in other places, it may be something else. It may be a different kind of appeal. That might not play so well in Portugal. It might be some other kind of appeal. Last point on hybrid regimes. So I'm American, but I was actually born in Turkey. You see, unfortunately, states that are nominal democracies, right? But starting to do things that are kind of like authoritarian light in some ways, like prompting their citizens to use homegrown apps, not use YouTube, not use WhatsApp, but use homegrown technology to share information and watch videos. Why? Because homegrown technology, a Turkish app, Turkish-developed app, or Russian-developed app, the state can get easier access to the information and thus keep a tighter control on the stories that are spread. You know, if there's a corruption scandal with a Turkish politician or Russian politician, they can snatch it away much more easily. And so you'll get these, I think you'll start to see regimes that maybe they have elections, but they also have state control over data and information and kind of interfere in the information landscape in ways that look more authoritarian.
Very good, thank you. So we have time for another round of questions and comments, please. Please go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. My question comes concerning, we talk about hybrid regimes and the challenge to democracy, but when we talk to the challenge to democracy, we see how democracies can react to it. So my question would be, how can democracies evolve, instead of being reactionary, actually being preemptive and evolve? How autocratic regimes evolve and become sort of hybrid, how can democracies do the same and still become democracies? And maybe in both of the MAs you're presenting here, how do you include this type of study of democracy, not as a reactionary to the autocratic challenge, but as sort of more biological and evolving sense? So, thank you.
Thank you. Your turn, please. Yeah.
Hi, well, thank you, first of all, for being on the panel. It's just interesting for me personally because I'm from Libya, so, you know, hearing about democracy, hearing about authoritarianism, and then living in it, and then moving to a democratic country, it's a complete, you know, culture change. I didn't even know that elections were a thing. I was young when I moved, and when I came here, I was growing up, and I was discovering all of these things, so it was just a complete shock for me. But I think what's interesting to me is, or what I really want to point out is that a lot of these degrees that that are available to us are maybe more Eurocentric or more, Western. I don't like to use the term Western, but that area centered. And so I think the Middle East and North Africa especially have a lot to offer because of the extreme history dating back centuries of civil strife and wars and revolutions. I saw the Libyan revolution firsthand, and it's not what it is documented when you're in the West or when you're in Europe. And I've been able to see it in two different perspectives. So my question is, how could we possibly bring in more of this perspective in degrees where, I mean, we're the next generation coming up. And so personally for me, I want to know how I can do change in my own country. I want to know why it's not working out, and not more so in, what happened on the Western or on the European perspective, but more so on ours, and why is it not working for us? Really, that's my question.
Very good. Thank you. Do we have a third question? Yes, we do. Please.
Hi, I'm actually a PhD student, but I did my undergrad in PPE, Politics, Philosophy and Economics, and then my master's at Johns Hopkins, so very near Georgetown. I found it fascinating, the approaches you have in dealing with polarization. So this, thought leadership, improv comedy, coming at it from different angles, mindful communication, and all of these. And I'm really concerned with the growing polarization we see amongst the young people. And this is not only in America, it's everywhere, in Europe as well. And this is a question I had to ask because, of course, we have two ex-ministers of education sitting on the panel as well. And I'm also vice chair of the leading international school here in Portugal. And this is an issue that we deal with often at the school level and at the parent level. So I was wondering to what extent we could teach kids at an earlier stage. They don't have to be at an MA stage, but start incorporating in the education how to communicate with one another in a humane way.
Very good.
Right?
Thank you. You have 3 minutes to answer the question, so. I don't know, who said? Do you want to add something? You have been so quiet here. You are a quiet person. Yeah. Can we say the same thing about you, Daniel?
I'm not quiet.
Oh, okay.
Can you mention the method you use?
Yeah,
in your
I'll talk
courses?
about that. First, I want to address the Libyan.
Yeah, please.
You know, I've spent my life living. I lived in Egypt for 2.5 years, and I speak Arabic. It's just that I understand 100% what you're talking about. And one of the things we do at Georgetown is regional studies. I mean, because every region has logics, has histories, has cultures, and so you have to appreciate those sort of factors. And then you have to map over that what is global, and come up with an understanding of how those two things interact. That's part of the training. So it's very important to do those things for whatever region we're talking about. So language, history, culture, being in the region, there's nothing beats being on the ground, right? Those are really important. So I think there are ways to do this. I don't believe in teaching a Western-centric model, whatever that is, but I do believe that democracy has certain universal qualities, but I also recognize they're mediated by local traditions, and we have to, and that's very important. I don't believe in cultural relativism, I can assure you of that, but I'm very keenly aware of how sort of the local and the national and the regional affect these dynamics. On the question of polarization, oh boy, I mean, it's such a difficult subject in the United States. my own work, and Elton's done some related kind of work, has been to use theater as a mechanism to get young people who come from totally different backgrounds. So we got a program between Georgetown and Evangelical School in Virginia, in which these students are prompted by an idea, and then they tell a story about their lives, which is true. The other person takes the story and steps into the shoes and becomes them. So the idea there is not to convince anybody that I'm right and you're wrong. It's simply to give them tools to understand sort of the deeper sort of reservoir of life and motivations. And, you know, honestly, it's a useful thing to do. It's been rewarding. But when we look at sort of the broader situation and the institutional sort of drivers and economic drivers of polarization, I recognize that it's important, but it's a drop, you know, honestly, it's a drop in the bucket. If we had more programs at a younger age and they were taken in schools from a younger age, this would probably be very useful. It's very hard to imagine how that works in an American federal system, by the way, because immediately people would say, you know, there's that's, you know, structural racism, and that's this, and, you know, such paranoia about these matters. But starting at a young age is obviously the place to make the difference. But I'll tell you one thing. If tomorrow morning in the United States we introduced ranked voting in our primaries, half of the problem of polarization politically would go away just like that. Just like that. But of course, precisely because it would go away, it's not going to go away because there's resistance to introducing that kind of voting reform that would really compel voters to think about coalitions beyond the extreme left and the extreme right.
Thank you. You want to add something? Do you?
If I can. Yes, in terms of, I mean, part of it, I would encourage you bringing your kind of Libyan experience in your classes and kind of writing the papers, et cetera, that inform. I think a lot of universities are trying to be very inclusive of various ideas. I mean, I was myself an international student in the US. I mean, until I was 13, I grew up in totalitarian Albania, which is as close as kind of North Korea right now. Right now, I'm coming here as an American professor. Partly, like, US global universities try to attract talent, and they actually encourage us to bring some of our ideas, et cetera, to. So, I mean, it's not a closed field. Actually, it's a vibrant field where there's, you know, we encourage new approaches, new ideas, new voices to come through, and it's very intentional, by the way, because our thinking grows stale if we do not allow for diverse perspectives. So it's not simply because just we're nice. We want to actually be at the cutting edge. And similar in terms of the polarization, yes, I mean, it is very hard, and I would concur with Dan that, you know, you need to look at it multiple levels, kind of institutional changes that sometimes are not politically viable, socioeconomic changes that depend on policies which can be kind of long to take, as well as educational dialogue, et cetera. But we have graduates of our program who, for example, also work and try to foster civic education. So that's an area that I think is underexplored in terms of thinking about how to be more explicit about encouraging this sharing of diverse perspectives and bringing people together who would otherwise not be together, and just listening to each other without the initial judgment. Yeah.
Our theater program, or performance program, is all online. You can go and actually watch these students do it, and how they, you know, and it's quite interesting to see that on the screen. Yeah.
Just one point on polarization. One thing that I've done in undergraduate and graduate classes here at Católica, and prior to this at University of Virginia, and it sort of comes naturally to philosophy. I guess one thing I would say is philosophy and debate. If kids learn how to debate and argue philosophically and critically at a young age, and to become comfortable debating and to understand that debating ideas doesn't necessarily mean a threat to them as people, right? That once they learn that, it becomes, I think, a bit easier. But one thing that I think is useful is training younger people to learn how to debate for ideas they don't necessarily agree with. So you debate in favor of the positions that you hold, but you also learn how to explain your opponent's view in a way that they themselves would be able to recognize. Instead of giving this caricature view of your opponent as just, you know, this idiot or maybe, you know, involved as conspiracy theory or whatever, to learn how to actually debate for views other than the ones that you yourself assume to be true. That experience, I think, teaches somebody something that would be very beneficial for combating polarization if it was done widely.
Very good. We are 4 minutes late. Final thoughts.
Okay. No, it was very, very interesting. And I was thinking that, in fact, these kind of programs give you a lot of information, many tools and many models instruments also exposed you to the experience and an array of experience that are even regionals or from different perspectives, different teams. The point is, in fact, your horizons are open, expanded, but in fact, all of this, the point is that much will be demanded of you in a global level. And in a global level, seen not just an international level, but global here reminds us that we are one world, we are one humanity. So this is the point. And I think even if we are divided in different nations and different systems with different problems and questions, the point is that the global reminds us that we are one world, one humanity. And so the common house, the common home is one. And I think this is the point.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.